Alright guys, so today I'm going to talk about my cut in general and the extreme measures I took at certain parts of this cut, why I took those measures, and what the results were now that I am more or less done with the dieting phase. So I have to say this cut has actually gone very well. I started at about 205 pounds, cut down to the low 180s. That was my plan this whole time. Took a little bit longer than I would have liked, but as far as results, I definitely lost mostly fat, obviously water and food bulk as well. I certainly lost some muscle, as you always will when you're dieting down, but I really don't think I lost that much. When you look at my strength numbers now compared to, say, January, February, when I was fully bulked up, most things lost maybe 5, 10 pounds here, a couple of reps, but the results on the whole were very good. Now, this contrasts with maybe back when I was in high school, and a lot of times I would diet down, and I would say, okay, I want to get shredded six pack. I wanted to get very, very lean. And the reason that I would stop cutting would be because I would lose muscle and strength. And I really just couldn't handle it mentally, especially because I never had a ton of muscle. So back then, I might have been a kind of soft 165, cutting down to like 150. And I just couldn't stand how skinny I was getting and losing that muscle and strength that I had worked so hard for. This cut, the muscle and strength retention was much better. And so really it just came down to how hard was I willing to push and how lean did I want to get. Now, one thing you'll notice that when people talk about their low calories, they'll say, oh, I had to get to this low of calories. But they're often talking about their lowest days. They're not really talking about their averages. This is very common. Oh, I had to get down to 1,800 calories. Well, maybe you did, but you're not counting the 2 refeeds. Your average calories weren't that low. So I can sit here and say, man, I had gotten down to 1,500 calories. And there were plenty of days that I actually did eat only 1,500 calories. But I incorporated a lot of diet breaks and refeeds. So a lot of times I was doing a large refeed once every week. At other times, I had taken diet breaks for up to 2 or 3 weeks at a time where I just ate at maintenance. And so if you actually look at the stress on my body, it's not like I was going months of eating at 1,500 calories, in which case I would probably be incredibly skinny at this point, because certainly even with my very adaptable metabolism, that level for that long would have led to extreme weight loss. But I had a lot of days where they were at maintenance or even above maintenance. And so because of that, this is something when people talk about their calories you have to consider. They're often just talking about their low. Now, a lot of people know I did the 3 to 4 weeks of carnivore diet, and that allowed me to bring my weight down to already like 183.6 at a low, like almost a month ago now. And at that time, what I said was I want to have about 5 weeks left of dieting. About a pound per week. I'm going to get down to about 178 to 180, and then I'll just go up from there. What I found when I finished carnivore diet was, and this makes sense, a lot of the weight that I had lost was probably just food bulk. So yes, 3 weeks of carnivore diet, I lost 3 pounds, but about 11 of those 21 days on carnivore diet was actually at maintenance calories. So really, did I lose 3 pounds in 10 days of dieting on carnivore? Almost certainly not, right? A lot of that was food bulk. So what happened when I finished carnivore diet was my weight went back up. Even though I was still in a calorie deficit, weight on the scale was going up because I had more food bulk. So that led to some frustration on my part, because even though logically that makes sense, I guess I just wasn't thinking that much about it. I hadn't done carnivore diet before, but it does make sense. So I kind of decided to do a crash diet the last few weeks. I would not recommend this to really anybody. Okay, this is something that I feel comfortable with experimenting because I know myself, I know my body, but it's not something I would ever have one of my clients do. It's not something I would recommend you do. But I ate 1,000 calories per day for 2 weeks straight. Now, I don't really know almost anybody who's done that, any male, certainly not any male my size doing that, and for good reason. It's not something that I would recommend. I had incredible food focus every day that I went through that. It was just a real mental struggle, because not only, and this is a really important point for the body's adaptability, not only was it very difficult to do, but I actually didn't lose almost any weight. Now you're going to hear that and say, there's no way. You must have been tracking improperly. You must have been sneaking in calories. That is impossible. Note that I'm not saying that I wasn't in a calorie deficit. I'm sure I was in a large calorie deficit doing this. However, I have historically always held a lot of water. Unfortunately, that just seems to happen. And when I finish a diet, a lot of that water sheds off. But during the diet, it can really be a mental struggle because you're not seeing the weight come off. And what can happen is, imagine if this is your weight and then you have your body fat, right? So obviously there's other things in your body fat. There's a lot going on there. You might be losing body fat, but your weight stays the same. And if you let that get to you and you see for a long time, okay, I'm just not losing actual scale weight, and then let's say you binge or you just go off the diet, it's going to look like your thought that you weren't losing weight was accurate. Because let's say you lost 2 pounds of fat, but you didn't lose any scale weight because you retained water. So you say, screw it, and you have a big cheat day, and then the next day you go off the diet again, etc. Now maybe you've actually gained 2 pounds of fat back. So you might have then lost the water because your body is no longer stressed, but you didn't lose any weight, and you've now confirmed to yourself, see, I didn't lose any weight when dieting, and it's the same as when I eat my normal foods or when I cheat, because it just didn't matter. Clearly I've been the same weight. Now when I started doing this 1,000 calorie thing, I was actually about 185. My weight went up for days. I went up to 186, 186.8 at a high, and then I eventually got back down. I hit one day at 183.2, but almost every day was above 185. Well, guess what? I finished the experiment at 1,000 calories. I had one 4,000 calorie day where I ate probably about 8 to 9 pounds of food. I had 7.5 pounds of just fruits and vegetables, and then obviously other foods on top of that. Despite that, the next day I woke up again at 185. Why? Because I probably shed a lot of the water, I got some good sleep, etc. And now, over the next week, I will probably lose a few pounds of water and actually kind of see the results from the 1,000 calorie experiment. But it was definitely demotivating to where every day I'd wake up and it's like, I'm not even seeing the results and I'm torturing myself. So one more reason that if you really don't understand calorie balance, you might really kind of mess yourself up long term because you're going to think and reinforce the idea that the diet isn't working when in reality you might just be storing water, you might be stressed, your sleep can be off, etc. The other thing to consider with my low calories is you might think that, like, if you look at my averages, it's actually probably about 1,800 to 2,000 throughout a lot of this cut, which is low, but it's not that low. But you also have to consider that, while I'm 185 to 205 pounds throughout the cut, I'm also not super active. So I work out 3 days a week. I do cardio maybe twice a week. And so to have lost all that weight with minimal cardio, it's not that surprising. My step count is low. I probably only get about 6,000 or so steps per day. I don't do a lot on top of just the biking that I do for my cardio. I see patients throughout the day. I'm walking here and there, but it's not a ton. So I'm not super active in that regard. Now, I certainly could have added more cardio and then eaten more, but I actually kind of wonder, is that in part why my strength retention was so well? Is that I just had low stress, I wasn't doing a ton of cardio. I've certainly had cuts where I've done tons of cardio in the past. If I think back to high school, that time I mentioned where I'm going to have abs, but I was down to 150 and just feeling skinny. Well, I was on the swim team that year, and I was doing morning cardio on my own on a treadmill, and I was working out full body 3 times a week. I was extremely active. I was dieting down on more like 2,200 calories, even though I was much lighter and less muscular than I am now. And I was exhausted all the time, and I was losing strength more. So it was part of my good strength retention, the fact that I was doing so little activity. I wasn't really tiring my body out with cardio. I've been doing very low volume, so literally I'll do only about 5 or 6 work sets per week per muscle group. And you can say that's so minimal, and that's probably in part why I had to eat so little calories. But again, very good retention of muscle and strength, so it's hard for me to argue as far as with the actual results, despite the fact that the process itself was definitely uncomfortable. As somebody who works with clients, something that I want to say is you have to consider, okay, so if I'm about 185 pounds right now, and I'm able to go 2 weeks at 1,000 calories and basically not lose weight, you have to consider that when you look at some of these women, especially who have larger water weight fluctuations due to their periods and just stress in general, there are going to be a lot of times where some of these women, we say, oh, these women are lying or they're not tracking correctly. That often happens, and they're not counting their cheats and things like that. But you have to consider, if I'm like this as a 185 pound male, imagine a 125 pound female who is maybe going through more water weight fluctuations, who's going to have a slower metabolism. There are going to be situations where people are not going to be losing weight on less than 1,000 calories. Now, again, not long term, not over months, but when you look at a client, I think sometimes you have these coaches who just say like, oh, you're lying, you don't know what you're talking about, or they just think that there's something that's nefarious going on here. And I would say that that's not always the case. That's certainly sometimes the case, but sometimes you do have these extreme situations with very adaptable metabolisms, a lot of adaptations as far as NEAT goes, and really a decrease in NEAT, along with, again, huge point, the water retention. People should really understand that that can account for several pounds when it comes to sodium, and the fact that you're often eating higher sodium foods to try to fill up on like vegetables and broths and everything like that while dieting down. Just some other things that I had noticed is that cravings really changed a lot during this diet. So at the start, not really too bad. As I got down to under 195 though, they definitely picked up quite a bit. And when I was on the carnivore diet, it was kind of interesting because a lot of people will talk about how when they're on a keto diet or they're on carnivore diet or anything like that, that their cravings go away, that their cravings for sweets go away, that they don't even find that stuff appealing. And that kind of makes sense in the sense that your body will often crave what it's being given. You know, your microbiome changes in response to the foods that you eat. And so there is some science behind that saying that the bacteria is actually making you crave those foods because now that that's what they're used to. However, I really noticed the opposite. When I was on carnivore specifically, not keto, but carnivore specifically, I was craving chocolate, which I'm not even a big chocolate fan, but I just wanted like candy bars and desserts. It was bizarre how much I wanted those, more than like I ever had craved them in my life. And I can't really explain that. I don't know why, other than just obviously when dieting, you're going to have cravings, but more than normal. It was very intense. And like every day I was thinking about it. Once I actually dropped down to the 1,000-calorie experiment, I found that the cravings for those specific foods weren't really there. But what I did notice was just kind of this, it wasn't the desire for like specific foods. It was just like, I don't want to be in this state anymore. I'm so fatigued and tired and just mentally drained from the diet that I just want to not be doing this. And whereas normally I would see food as just like a part of my life and it can enhance an experience, it got to the point where I was really starting to think like, why would I ever want to do this again? And again, of course, I can objectively step back and say, this is happening and in response to my diet. And that's why I feel this way. And this will change. And I know it will change. But without that introspection, that was truly the belief and the psychology I had going on, where I really felt like I have no desire to diet again. I want food to be a big part of my life. I want to eat here, here, and here, and just be able to eat good food every single day. And the actual goal almost seemed silly to want to diet down, especially without like a contest or a specific event. The idea that I would be dieting like that rather than enjoying all these good foods, it really just seemed pointless to me. Now, I would never tell somebody not to try to achieve their goals. I wouldn't even tell myself that you know, you shouldn't keep pushing. I think it's important that when you're in a good mental state, you can create the goals, and then this is something that you can push through when things get tough. I'm just explaining to people who haven't really been there before, haven't really done serious or extreme diets, there are things that are going to come up that are going to make you convince yourself to maybe stop, to not push through. And if you really care about the goal, you should push through those. At times, you might have to reevaluate what the goal is and decide that it's not worth it. For me, I knew that I had to keep pushing. I just would have been very upset with myself if I didn't see it to the end of my timeline and get to where I wanted to be. But I definitely noticed significant psychological changes in terms of even caring about the end goal. I think part of it towards the end also had to do with the fact that I wasn't even seeing the results. So even though I knew objectively the results must have been coming because I must have been in a deficit, there is something to be said for when you're seeing those results. As hard as carnivore diet was, it was motivating because you just felt like you always had a flat stomach. You felt like you were like losing weight. You felt like you were just losing weight all the time. It seemed like every couple of days I looked like I was leaner, and that was motivating. Whereas on the 1,000 calories, it was like, man, I'm torturing myself and I'm not seeing those results. I'm actually gaining weight, which was, again, pretty incredible. And to see that I'm so bloated and not seeing the results can be very frustrating. Also, because I was so depleted, I had no carbs in me basically for weeks and weeks. I had like no vascularity. So even though I was leaner than I had been in the past at significantly higher body weights, I would have higher vascularity. So, you know, I could think of when I was originally dieting down at like 195, I probably had more vascularity than I do now in the low 180s because I was just so depleted. So you just see yourself and you're like, I look flat, I'm not seeing anything. And so again, this is why it's important to know what the goal is, to be able to push through these obstacles, and also to have other means of determining your progress. So for me, for instance, I use skin fold calipers, and waistline. So even though I wasn't looking vascular, even though I just wasn't looking as impressive, I could see that the calipers were still going down, and I knew, okay, I am still going towards my goal. Something that I have to actually talk with Eric Trexler about at some point, because I'm pretty sure he had said this on a podcast. I was talking about how back like when I was way, way younger, and I was really food obsessed to the point that I was writing my cravings down for my cheat days so that I could binge on those foods, and how basically that was a really unhealthy thing and mindset for me to do. And I remembered him telling me that he had actually written his cravings down during a contest prep because it allowed him to kind of mentally get it off his mind, and then he just knew, well, when it's time, I can eat those foods. So I actually gave that a shot this time, and I've never done that before really, where throughout the diet, when I had a craving, I wrote it down, and I wanted to see how that would be. And it was funny because, again, as the food focus increased as I dieted down, I found it almost amusing where, when I'm bulking up, I kind of don't care that much. And when I was dieting here, it was like, oh, you know what? I could do this recipe and make this protein shake with this variation and all these different recipes. That's very common for people who sell dieting books. They'll have all these different recipes, and you think, wow, this protein shake variation and this one, and look, I can make this. And there becomes this kind of obsession with food and this focus, which I don't think is necessarily wrong to have an enjoyment with food. But I've just always noticed that when I'm done dieting and I start bulking up, I'm kind of like, meh, whatever is good, I want to eat it. And I don't necessarily want to think about making all these different recipes. I find what I like, and I just go with that. And I'm sure that will happen. But as I'm, again, in my dieting brain right now, this is why I wanted to make this video now, as it's fresh. It's very interesting because after doing this for so long, I can step back and know that these changes are going to happen. I can step back and understand why these changes are going to happen. And yet, despite that, the changes still happen. So I will still think to myself, oh my God, I just love fruit so much. It's so great. Well, that's because I'm starving and I'm dieted down. My 205-pound bulked up self is not thinking, oh my God, fruit's so amazing, it's like dessert. But it is how I feel right now. But it is interesting to kind of look back and see the differences then versus now. And that does happen all the time. Every year, if I diet or I bulk up, I see those changes happen. But going back to what I was saying about writing down the cravings, having done that now, it's not something that I would recommend, because what I found was that, yes, maybe if I had a craving and I wrote it down, I could then stop thinking about the craving because I just knew, like, okay, it's written down, I'll get to it when I'm done dieting. What happened, though, is over months of that happening, I had like 20 things written down that I want to try, a lot of which probably would have gone away on their own. Right? So, okay, we're out somewhere, it's a barbecue, oh, I'm not going to eat that kind of food, but when I'm done, I'll eat it. Well, that's probably a craving that, after the next day, I just wouldn't have thought about. But now it's written down, and when I'm done dieting, it seems like, oh, I'm going to go through all these cravings, which I'm sure I won't, but I'm just saying that idea of having it written down, maybe for some people that's a helpful psychological trick. Certainly you could try it out. For me, I didn't find it too helpful, and I think it will result in more net junk food being eaten afterwards. So it's not something that I would probably do in the future. I really found that I had to just push thoughts of food out of my mind right away. And again, a lot of these aren't necessarily new things that I've learned. A lot of this is stuff that I've known for many years, because this is probably the, 10th plus time I've dieted down. But it's something that if you let these thoughts come into your head, a lot of times you'll see this, people will start to think about all the different foods. They'll even go online and look up like restaurants and things that they're going to eat at. I found that it was really just helpful for me. If it came into my head, immediately push it out. Don't play it out in your head, and just whatever I could do to focus on other things. So of course, a lot of people will say when dieting, it's great to stay busy, to have other things on your mind, to have other goals, because when you start to just think about food and that, oh, these are the foods I'm going to eat, that can be really problematic. So have other goals, have other things that will preoccupy your time and your thoughts, because if you're constantly thinking about food and you're constantly thinking about the foods that you're going to be able to eat, obviously that's going to be problematic. It's going to make it much harder. I found for me, this was hardest at night. During the day, I don't really mind being hungry. I've done many 24-hour fasts. In general, I intermittent fast, so maybe I'll eat 12 to 8. I don't love being hungry, but I really don't mind too much during the day. At night, though, that's very hard for me. That has definitely been harder these last few weeks, where during the day I think, yep, on my way to the goal, it's going to happen. And at night, that's when the questioning thoughts come into my mind of like, well, I don't really have a specific thing I'm dieting for, and I tend to want to convince myself to not continue dieting. Now, just due to my psychology and always being kind of the guy who pushes forward and pushes towards the goals, I knew I wouldn't be okay with myself if I had just stopped arbitrarily, but those thoughts happen more and more at night for me, for sure, which I think is pretty common. So the last thing I want to comment on is, what am I going to do from here? A lot of people know that I've talked about after 15 years or so. Obviously, I'm not going to be going into some huge bulking phase. I'm not going to be saying now's my time to be gaining. However, I do love training. I love productive training, and I love trying to progress, even if I know that it's not going to result in all this muscle gain. I like to see what strength progress I can make, and I like to have goals. So overall, I will be doing a very slow bulk up. I wouldn't even call it a bulk, honestly. It's more just I'm going to not be dieting anymore. I'm going to not be in a deficit, and I will slowly be adding calories and getting to more normal calories. So if I'm in the low 180s as like a real weight right now, I would probably over the next few months kind of trend upwards towards 190. The method that I'm going to be using to do this, so I actually do plan on doing DC training. Dante Trudel is the person who created this. If you don't know what it is, I would suggest looking it up. Not that I think it's anything magic, but it's a very intense and fun way to train. And well, I would consider it fun. A lot of people wouldn't consider that fun, but very, very intense way to train. And as far as my nutrition, I plan on doing, it's kind of like a carb cycling or refeed method, where rather than just going up in calories, maybe a couple hundred every few weeks, I'm going to be having twice a week where I have more or less, I wouldn't even call it, it's certainly not a cheat day, a free day if you want to call it, where I'm going to be eating closer to 4,000 to 5,000 calories, and the other days are going to be closer to 2,000 calories. I'm interested to see if this helps me with some of my GI issues, in the sense that rather than having a surplus every single day, I'm going to have 5 days of the week where it's a lot easier on my stomach. The foods I'm eating, the amount I'm eating are easier, and then the surplus will be in 2 days. We'll see if that has any effect there. And on top of that, I also just find this to be an interesting way to go about it. I have a friend who's maintained just about 10 pounds above contest lean for the last few years doing this, because he found that when he was eating 3,000 calories every single day to maintain that weight, he still felt like he was always having cravings and was always hungry. So now he'll have a refeed, and let's say that puts him up 3 pounds in body weight. He will then wait until he baselines again. Usually that takes about 2 to 3 days, and then he'll have another refeed. And so that's more or less what I'm going to be trying. So that twice a week, if I want to be more social, if I want to go out and eat some good food there, I can do that. And then the rest of the days I'm having lower calories. So again, calorie cycling, carb cycling, these things are not terribly new. This is a little bit of a different method of doing that, but the idea is a very, very slow weight gain in my case, and allowing some time to really just be able to not think about the food, enjoy what I want, but 5 days of the week, I am much more strict and lower calories, and then filling it up with more, fibrous vegetables and things to keep me full on those days. So that's what I'm going to be doing going forward. Definitely looking forward to the change in training. I've been doing a lot of the same training for a long time now, so that will be interesting as well. Anyway, guys, I just wanted to detail some of the crazy things that I did during this cut, from the big refeeds to carnivore diet to a 2-week experiment at 1,000 calories. Again, not necessarily recommending these things, but I wanted to detail and explain what I did to go from about 205 pounds to a fairly lean low 180s. So I hope you guys enjoy this. Any questions you might have, feel free to post below or reach out.